right, Mama, you want to come into the screen a little more? All right, we got Paul, we got Manny, we got Brianna's here. This is cool. Does everybody have their Chardonnay? Nice. Good job, Cindy. Switch it to
Dad.
Oh, there's Dad. Good. Good. Jim.
Bill.
Bill's here. This is great. Scott's here. Fantastic. Oh, we still got. There we go. How is everybody doing today?
Drink a glass of Chardonnay. How bad can it be?
I like your Chardonnay background. You are so
you got it, man.
You're thematic.
You got the props.
Those are your grapes.
I love it. I love it. Hopefully we'll
That's
have
awesome.
a Drish showing up in a few minutes with the dueling backgrounds,
and Harvey.
Yeah, because that's fun. So, all right. Well,
so we got a few people we're waiting on. Do you want to just have a little Chardonnay and while we're waiting? Might as well.
Cheers.
We'll have to do it again, but hey, you know.
Cheers.
We will. What's the good news from the day? As anybody?
I don't have the virus yet. How's that?
Well, there you go.
We'll drink to that.
We'll drink to that.
Yeah.
Rona free, huh?
Well,
I don't know about the yet part, but
Well, we're going to keep it away. We're keeping our insides all clean.
Antiviral. Disinfecting our insides.
You got to unmute yourself.
Oh, he doesn't know how.
Oh. You can just grow grapes. Do surgery.
Oh, nice. Scott, I like your cheers there. Hi, Orlando. Good to see you.
Hello. Hi, Carrie. Hello. First time joining. Hope all is well.
This is your first one, right?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I'm about to go open up the bottle of Chard right now.
Perfect.
There's Harvey.
And there's Harvey. And Drish is here with no video. So we have to give Harvey the shout out for the recipe for the day. I don't know how many people made it. It was super simple and beautiful.
Yep.
Ta-da-ta-da. So thanks, Harvey. All right. Did you want to?
Hello, ladies.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Hey, happy belated birthday.
Oh, thank you. Awesome.
Oh, wow. Look at the
Right.
Whedons are in Africa.
That's great. All right.
That's great.
This is fun. Harvey, did you want to say a few things about the Tonnato inspiration?
Can you hear me okay?
Now I can. Yep.
I had some problems getting in. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
It's okay.
We're
Are you hearing me? Are you hearing me?
Yep, now we are. I think your video has a little bit of a lag, but the audio works.
Okay. I'm just looking at the option. Stop video. No, I don't want to do that. Okay. Well, all right. I'm here. Do you want me to talk about the dish?
Yes, because then I can eat it without feeling guilty. So please.
Okay. Well, you can eat it anyway. It doesn't matter.
Okay. Oh, we should start with cheers to everybody who wasn't here the first time we did this.
Yep. Cheers, everybody.
Cheers. Yeah, well, it's asparagus season, so I thought the asparagus thing that I prepared last week would probably work with this that I drank it with last week, or that I ate it with last week. The The inspiration is for the sauce. It's basically a tonado, but it's a very simple version of the same sauce that you put on vitello tonado in northern Italy, and it's basically a puree of olive oil with tuna and mayonnaise. And you just puree that up to something, and a little bit of lemon juice to balance the richness. And I like that on all kinds of vegetables as well as veal.
Mhm.
So if you're a vegan, you could do that. No, you can't do this because it has tuna in it. But if you want to lighten things up, a vegetable with it is pretty good. I made mine today with salmon. We cooked some salmon last night, and I had salmon left over, so I pureed that. So it looks like this.
Lovely.
Ooh.
Little bit of pink, and I couldn't get really fat asparagus this week. I'm really disappointed.
We got super fat asparagus.
I was going to actually bring one up, but I'll just be like crying.
And basically, asparagus is supposed to kill white wine, or kill wine in general, but I have not found that to be true, especially if you grill it, because the smokiness becomes an important flavor. And whatever it is in asparagus that clashes with some red wines seems to go away when you grill the asparagus, and or roast it. I roasted it last week, and I grilled it today, just in a grill pan. And I think this, and thank you for sending this wine so I could try it along with you. I think one thing that happens with this is that it kind of makes the wine stand up a little bit straighter. If it's kind of soft and rich in the mouth without the vegetable, when you add the vegetable flavor to it, kind of stands up and becomes a little more serious.
Well, Johnny, so it might be a little saltier than it should be.
No, I think it's great, and it's super simple. Like, I've never actually made tonado before, because I think I had in my head it was like fancy and complicated, but this is the perfect example of super simple and really delicious.
Yeah, it's very.
And you can eat it with a knife and fork, or you can just make a little bowl of the sauce and dip the spears into it.
I had to do the low quality control and just eat it with a spoon while I. And again, that's one of the beauties of being a trained winemaker, is that you have to taste everything, right?
Exactly. I mean, if you didn't do that, you wouldn't be as good as you are.
Well, thanks. That was one of the things that I learned when I was working at Mondavi, which Manny reminded me earlier that Mondavi is, for a long time, it was the university, and everybody went through Mondavi U, including Manny, who's going to talk to us about barrels in a bit. So I'm going to just say that both of us are well trained, I assume.
Yeah, obviously.
So yeah, no, I think this is a great pairing with the Chardonnay.
Yeah, it brings out it makes I think it makes the wine stand up a little straighter and brings out the fruit a little more. And I love fruit in Chardonnay.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the things that's really important with Chardonnay, is how much is having the fruit, because there's a lot of, if you don't have enough fruit and you put oak and you put malolactic and you put all these things on it, you can cover up some of that fruit flavors, where it's really important, especially for the style that we're trying to make. It's important to have that fruit, to showcase that fruit, because Chardonnay can be such a beautiful wine. And this reminds me that I forgot to bring up the picture of where in the vineyard we come from. And since we always go back to the vineyard as to why the Chardonnay has, or any of the grapes have fruit, I'm gonna let Mom tell you how much she loves Chardonnay for a minute while I find it.
I do love Chardonnay. In fact, when 2004 was the first vintage we made Chardonnay, and at the time people said, "Oh, why are you making Chardonnay? You'll never sell it." It's awful, has no flavor. And I thought, what planet are you people coming from? Because I've always loved Burgundy for Chardonnay. And when we started making Chardonnay, people tasted it and they said, oh, at first they'd say, no, not Chardonnay. And then they taste it and say, oh, I've never had a Chardonnay like this. And then I came to realize that maybe a lot of people haven't tasted Burgundian Chardonnays or good Chardonnays. And they had a lot of Chardonnay that maybe doesn't have a lot of flavor. And I get that. But oh man, good Chardonnay. I love it.
Yep.
Oh, as Dan mentioned, the Alsace has a big asparagus festival. They probably drink, my guess would be Riesling, because they do a lot of Riesling or other aromatic whites. And I had grilled asparagus with Riesling the other day. So I think we had Riesling with tacos for lunch.
Yeah, we gotta,
So all these things they say aren't food wines, you just gotta find the right wine.
Well,
Wine foods.
yeah. Pinot Gris not too bad either.
True. But we don't grow that. So are you gonna head to the vineyard?
I am gonna head to the vineyard.
Let's go. Let's take a walk on the wild side.
We're gonna go to the vineyard. We're gonna go to our photo that we look at every week and say, so we tasted, what did we do last week? The train station from all over. We did the carriage house from down here. Next week is the coat from our hillside vines. And then as we mentioned back here, there's this little dip down in the Chardonnays on the north facing, the Syrahs on the southwest facing. And that is really important because that way you get all of the different, you can see better in this photo, you get those microclimates that really make a difference. So here is that Chardonnay that is north facing. So it doesn't get as much sun. It's not as warm. It doesn't get the heat units. And Chardonnay likes to be in a cooler environment than grapes like Cabernet, which likes it warmer. So the Cabernet gets that warm sunshine all day long. The Chardonnay is really protected until the afternoon. And it's got a little more canopy. And then the Syrah over here is that intermediate area. So that's how we get, and this block still gets enough heat and sunlight. So we get a lot of those tropical flavors. Which is where the pineapple comes from, that we get a lot of pineapple in these grapes. So it's from up here. And then there's another block of Chardonnay down here. If you follow this over on the right, there's about 10 rows down on the west end of the vineyard that get a lot more Meyer lemon characteristic that brings to it, so it gives it that complexity, and it's interesting to see in different vintages which ones pop. And
I think the food you eat makes a difference on which ones pop.
mm-hmm.
So they blend together well, but they come out depending on what you're eating. That's why it pairs so well with so many different things.
So then while we're in the vineyard,
So, Carrie, let me ask you, what?
Yep.
How many different pieces of the vineyard are in this wine? 2 or 3?
2.
Did you say 2? So
2.
The second one, you talked about the characteristics of the second one, kind of Meyer lemon character that came out of it. What's the dominant characteristic of the first area?
The first area has a lot more tropical notes. So you get pineapple, you get some guava, you get, like 2009, I characterized it as pineapple. It was the pineapple upside down cake vintage. And so, and then there's other, I think 17 has a lot more of the Meyer lemon quality that pops through. 17 also had, as a vintage, had really great acidity. So it's that fresher pineapple, but there's a fair bit of pineapple in this one too, I think. And so that's part of the fun of place-based wines that are the same parts.
So Adrish is on the crush pad.
Adrish, I'm glad you're on the crush pad this week, because we're going to talk about winemaking more this week than we have in the past. While we're still in the vineyard, we're going to unmute Dad. Dad! I've got your pictures, which we can go through, but if you want to give us I've got I've got the 3 weeks worth of Syrah, and I have the latest week of the Cabernet. So this is the Syrah vine from 415. And then, so that was 2 weeks ago. And then last week we said we were starting to get some heat and some growth. And so we had a pretty big shift from 2 weeks ago to last week. And then that continued, and Dad took these pictures today. So it's up to the minute. And this is this week. So you can see that it's really, things are progressing pretty quickly in the vineyard right now.
So it's obvious that in 2 weeks, the vines have jumped. Are you going to put the picture of the vine back?
Sure.
Because there's a couple of things I want to point out about the vine.
Okay. There you go.
Okay. What's happened with all this growth, you'll notice there's a whole lot going on in a very small space. And so next week, before we do the shoot thinning, I'm going to take another picture so you can see how much is growing week by week by week. And then we're going to shoot thin it, and then we'll do a picture after we shoot thin it, and you'll see our target is to have 2 shoots out of all that mess that have fruit on them. You can start to see the fruit on this one, yeah, right there. That if you were in the vineyard and looked at that, you could see the mini cluster already formed. And then besides the 2 shoots from that area, we want to see about a regeneration shoot that we can save for next year. So we don't expect to fruit it, but we expect it to grow big and strong, and then we'll prune the rest of it, and that'll be the new shoot that we'll work off of next year. And then on the cab. So the Syrah grows more aggressively early in the season, but the contrast with the cab from last week and 2 weeks ago, there's just the same amount of growth that's occurring week by week at this stage in the vineyard, and it's really, really exciting to see the vines coming out of their dormancy in such a short period of time. And again, we'll do the same thing with this vine next week. We'll do a before and an after, and you'll get to see what we're doing in the vineyard with those 2.
Yeah, and the weather, Adrish, to your question, it was pretty cool, and then all of a sudden it has been warm, and today is a little overcast, but it's warm. Was it 80? I mean, it was supposed to get up to 80. It's definitely been warm this week. So as you can see, when things get warmer, it happens faster. And if you guys missed it, we're also tracking a Cabernet vine. I don't know if is it the same vine, Dad?
Yes.
Okay, we're tracking the same cab vine on Instagram every Friday. We're doing like a 1-minute segment, and then it'll be really easy because it's IGTV. You can go back and see what happened the previous week to this week, and do kind of like I did with the pictures of, what did it look like last week? What did it look like 2 weeks ago? So to provide a little bit of that, another look at that continuity, and so that's an
excitement.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really exciting. And this year, we're running we have an average time that we look for bud break and so on. And this year we're running about a week behind at this point, but it doesn't matter because as we accumulate heat units, the vines can catch up. Last year, we started off way behind, and lo and behold, before you knew it, we turned out to be a week ahead going into the summer. And then things continued to change, and so we changed what we're doing in the vineyard to deal with the weather.
All right. Do we have any questions for Dad before I put him back on mute? If he knew how to do it himself.
Yeah, you don't want to let him talk too much.
Pretty brutal there, Hugh. I got 3 daughters and a wife. I can't talk either. So
All right, on that note,
You might get muted too.
no.
Carrie,
Yeah,
hi, it's Aaron. How you doing?
how are you? Nice to see
I'm
you.
good. What can you talk to me about the oak regimen on your Chardonnay? Did you go over that? I missed it.
Well, you didn't. I was just about to go into the winemaking section because we start in the vineyard and then everything gets handpicked.
Gotcha. So are there any questions? Was a vineyard based? Are there any questions?
Oh,
But that's okay.
no, you're leading me. That's perfect. You're leading me exactly into where I'm going next. So thank you.
We didn't even set them up to do that.
No. So we bring the grapes in and they go directly to the press. So the whole clusters come out of the press and we get the juice and then it gets settled overnight. So we get most of those solids out and then they go directly into the barrels. So the Chardonnay is, from a winemaking perspective, it's a unique thing. Rosé and Riesling are, in my world, they're whites. Chardonnay is a thing and then red wines are a thing. And there's variation between the differences, but Chardonnay is really it's the most unique of all of the winemaking that we do because it's the only wine that we ferment in barrels. So it actually spends 1.5 years in not just French oak, but all boot, which is why we figured it made sense for Manny to come today. And so it goes through the primary fermentation, then where the yeast converts sugar to alcohol, then we do the secondary fermentation, where the bacteria convert malic acid to lactic acid, where you get all that creaminess and stability. And these things are how we can bottle these wines unfined and unfiltered. And it's about 1/4 to 1/3, right? No, it's 1/3. Yeah, it's about 1/3. It's about 1/3 new French oak every year. So we get, like right now, I usually have about 12 barrels. So we get 4 barrels from Manny every year. And so I have 4 barrels from this year, 4 barrels from the previous cycle, and 4 barrels from the cycle before that. So we've got about 4 first, 4 second use, 4 that are neutral. And so then after 1.5 years in the barrels with all the lees being stirred in, we go through more often at the beginning, but when we get farther into the process, we'll go through and stir those lees in, the solids that you get from all of that dead yeast cells, grape bits, and they fall down to the bottom. And over time, those yeast cells will break open and you get proteins and different things into the body of the wine, which is where you get the texture. And we're not making sparkling. Bill, don't ask that question. It's a lot of work. I'm too lazy for that. So you get all that texture and that richness, and then this is good that Dad's muted because we get to a certain point in the process, and you put those barrels down one level, single level high, and we don't touch them, don't move them, don't touch them. And I have to mute Dad because at the beginning he'd be like, "Well, I'll just move them and then they'll be out of the way." And it's like, no, you can't move them because when you move them, you stir up that stuff. And we want all the lees to settle very, very cleanly. And so we just rack off of the lees into a tank and bottle out of the tank. So everything has to be done attention to detail is important at all phases. When you're racking off the lees, it's the Chardonnay, it's super important because anything that you bring with you is going to pretty much end up in the bottle. So that's always a very detail-oriented, even by our standards, it's a really detail-oriented day where you just have to be on. So, and then it spends some more time before it goes out through the wine club or it sits in your cellar and you wait to drink it. I found a bottle of 15 on the counter.
Ooh.
So, which I probably shouldn't have said since Mom likes older Chardonnay and now she's going to drink it.
Carrie, do you inoculate or is it native wheat fermentation?
We inoculate. We use cultured yeast because if you have 12 barrels, you can't afford for one of them to not be good. Yeah. And a combination of I've done enough native ferments in other places and I don't always like the qualities and the characteristics. I feel like if you especially with the diversity of wines that we make, we use different yeast for Riesling versus Cabernet. We don't put Cabernet yeast in the Chardonnay for a reason, and we don't put if the Riesling yeast was the one that kicked it off, because that's what's going to ferment it. It's not grapes it's not vineyard yeast, it's winery yeast. The Riesling is such a vigorous fermenter, even at low temperatures. The kinetics of the fermentation would just be off the charts. It would be done in 2 days if it fermented with Riesling yeast, and then you lose a lot. So, and one of the things about the yeast we use for Chardonnay is it really is great for that mouthfeel and texture. So,
I was just curious. I didn't know.
and then June wants to know how long we can age the Chardonnay, or is it better to drink right away? Dad says no. Dad, do you want to answer that question? We'll let you answer that question. Go ahead.
The Chardonnay is built to last. It will go. We have not reached the point where the Chardonnay has gone over the hill. Carrie has poured it for critical judgment and was told it's guts ball to open an 8-year-old Washington Chardonnay for a critic.
It was a 10-year-old
Chardonnay. There was a guest last week that was drinking, I believe it was 2011, so that was 9 years old, and his wife complimented the winemaker on the wine. So we really haven't reached a point, and we do test it against white Burgundies, and so of age. So we don't feel we're taking a back seat on any score there.
Oh, Barb has the 11 tonight. Nice.
Oh, good you.
Nicely done, madam.
Wow.
The first vintage was 2004. And like Mom said, that was the height of ABC, anything but Chardonnay timeframe. And thankfully, people have decided that the grape is worth making again and worth drinking, because...
Well, it's still the #1 white wine grape sold, I think. But the thing about Chardonnay is there's so many ways to make it, like a lot of wines. And there aren't the best Chardonnays out there. But you know what? There's a lot of Cabernet that's not the best Cabernet, and nobody gets on Cabernet. So that to me just doesn't hold water. But that does turn the public off. And if you drink enough of the wine that you don't like, then you throw the whole baby out with the bathwater. And like I said, I think Chardonnay is it's a lovely wine. It's great food wine, which I prefer a style like this with food, but that's so yummy.
Yeah.
Yummy.
So Jim wanted to know if we bottle all of it or sell some of it. We sell some of it to Owen Rowe, and they make a Jabril Vineyard Chardonnay. And a couple of years ago, we started selling some to Valdemar Estates. So Marie was trained in Dijon, and she makes beautiful Chardonnay. And so we're excited about her getting a chance to make some Chardonnay.
She has bought the Chardonnay in the past when she was at Forgeron. So she's familiar with the grape, with our grapes, and she wanted them when she went to Valdemar. So that's great. It's wonderful to have really good winemakers who are, well-trained handling your fruit.
Mm-hmm. So, all right. Well, I'm going to let Manny talk about barrels, because you guys have been asking about barrels for a while.
Why? Why are people asking about barrels?
Because they're curious. The inquiring minds want to know.
Well, welcome everybody. I've been in the wine. I was just talking to Kathy and Carrie earlier. I've been in the wine business for over 40 years. I worked at Robert Mondavi for 21 vintages, and I've been barrel rep for Boutes and Chardonnay Cooperage. Well, Boutes for 21 years, and Chardonnay, which we bought about 11 years ago. So, and I've been selling barrels to Hewitt County. I don't know, Co, tell me, how long have I been selling barrels to Copenville?
2004.
No, you had red barrels before that, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the first barrels were when Co was helping you guys out, but that was a while ago.
It was
I
interesting.
remember.
It was interesting when we looked at this, and this is a shout out to Stan Clark, who is
Yeah.
who is one of our angels now, and we were talking about putting this together, and we said, you know, which barrels should we use, because we knew there were a lot of great Chardonnay barrels, and we both kind of looked at each other and said boot at the same time.
Yeah.
It was kind of like, if we only can use 2 barrels, we probably should use boot, because of the barrels are made for Chardonnay in such a, I think you tell us more about how they're made, but
Well, we'll talk about that a little bit later. I just kind of wanted to give you a little bit of how trees are grown, how I got some photos for you, a couple of videos, and just to give you an idea of the whole process and just how fascinating. I think it's one of the most fascinating things around. But anyhow, can you guys see that?
Yep.
So that is a typical parcel of a French forest. So the forests in France have been managed now since the 17th century. It was originally started through a French minister called Jean-Baptiste Colbert. And to this day, there's a Colbert forest there. Actually, it's in the Tronchet forest. But he was the one that was credited with. He actually started the French Merchant Marines, and he wanted to grow oak trees for shipbuilding, to build masts and ship parts. So the oak trees have to be very straight, very tall, with as few knots as possible. And so they began this forest management program where, if you look at these trees, they look very different than oak trees that are grown domestically that you would see in the States. It's actually a different species of oak. It's Quercus alba versus Quercus petrea, and they have different structures, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. In terms of, and that's one of the reasons why French oak barrels are so much more expensive than American oak barrels. But anyhow, so the forest management, what they do is the saplings are grown in a very dense, they start out grown in a very dense fashion. So the trees are always growing towards the light. So all the canopy, this isn't a really good picture. This is a forest that's been pretty harvested. So they'll harvest a parcel over a 70 or 80 year period of time. All these trees are a minimum of 150 years old up to 180, a few 200 years old. So as you can imagine, this is a very, very long-term project. There are private forests in France, but we only buy from the what is called the Office National des Forêts, which is basically their forest service, and they're the ones that are now responsible for managing the forests. So each tree is marked, so they don't clear cut a parcel. They'll mark trees, like I say, over a 60 to 80 year period of time. They have an auction every year where we go and we bid on parcels. So we have our own people who work in the forest all year long, and the government will come out with a catalog of the parcels and the trees that are available. We'll go in and do our own assessment and decide how much. And when we bid on a parcel, you're bidding on the whole lot. So you have to really kind of know what you're doing, because of course, like any government, they're trying to make money, and they always overestimate the usable linear meters of wood in that forest. So we go in and send our own people in, and then that's how we decide how we're going to at the auction, how we're going to bid on the forest. We buy about 60% of our trees as standing trees and the rest as logs. There are a lot of large suppliers, or they're basically just stave mills that will cut lots of trees, and we'll buy logs. We don't buy any staves, any finished wood. It's all either standing trees or logs. There are about 40 different forests in France. We buy from a handful, about 20 of them, mostly in the center of France, which is in the central part of just south of Paris. As you can see, the wood color can vary quite extreme. Here you see the white on the outside, that's sapwood, that's not usable. The heartwood in the middle is not usable, only in between the two. So in general, there's a lot of waste when it comes to forest. So this is typically how a tree is felled in about 40 seconds. So in the old days, they used to climb the tree and top them. That got a little bit too dangerous. And we lost a few guys doing that because you end up damaging the trees around them, and a lot of widow makers, as they say. And so they quit doing that. So now they don't climb anymore. This is our wood yard where we bring all the logs to. We have we try to keep about a 2-year supply of logs. Just for such cases as this. We just never know what the market's going to be like. This year, we don't know what the market's going to be like for barrels. It's going to be down probably because of this COVID thing. So we'll end up having quite a bit of wood, or we probably just won't buy as much in this next auction in October. Trees they're cut to 1 meter length, which is roughly the length of a stave. For a standard 225 liter barrel, and then we'll adjust based on the size of barrel that we're making. We actually can make we actually make tanks, wood tanks, fermentation tanks, and in terms of smaller vessels, about 600 liters is about the largest that we'll make. But the vast majority of what we make and sell are 225 and 228 liter. 228 is a Burgundy barrel. And that's typically what is used in Burgundy for Pinot and Chardonnay, and 225 is what we call a Bordeaux barrel, and that's typically what's used in Bordeaux. Shape's a little bit different. Burgundy's a little fatter and shorter. Not really sure why these two shapes developed this way. A lot of speculation is because of the fact that Chardonnay is aged on lees, so you get a little bit more surface to volume ratio in contact with the lees in a shorter, fatter barrel versus a Bordeaux barrel. But that's just speculation. We really don't know why. Probably just because Burgundy wanted to be different than Bordeaux, which they typically do. Here is how a log is cut into a meter length.
You totally couldn't do that in the US, Manny. That whole walking across the back of where the blade is. I don't think OSHA should let you do that here.
Can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I just want to make sure. So this is where we get to why there's so much more waste in French oak than there is in American oak. All of the wood, because of the species of oak and its structural characteristics, all of French oak has to be hand split along the medullary rays of the wood. So whereas American oak can be hand sawn, all of it can be you can just use saws to cut across the grain. You don't have to split along the grain. The reason is because because of the cell structure of the Quercus petraea, you'll end up with leaky barrels if you cut across the grain, which is the opposite of American oak. You can cut across the grain and it won't leak. So consequently, 80% of the wood is waste in French oak versus 20% in American oak. So you get way more usable wood from an American oak piece of log than you would a French oak log. So that consequently has a huge impact on the price of a barrel. A French oak barrel right now is about $1,000 to $1,100, $1,200. American oak, I'm not really sure because we don't do American oak, but I think you could probably get an American oak barrel for about $500. So it's about half the price. We do employ some technology. You see, we've got some technology that we use to try to maximize our production. And this gives an idea. It scans the log, the piece of wood, and it tells the guy where he should split it in order to maximize the number of staves he can get out of it. That's a typical hand splitter. You can see there's a lot of manual labor involved in making a barrel. And it's very dangerous work.
Hey, Manny.
Missing.
We have a question of, can you use that extra wood or the waste wood that doesn't go into a barrel? Can you do anything with that, or?
We do sell some of it to chip makers and guys that are making tank staves. But a lot of it ends up as firewood, to be honest with you. Because we just produce so much of it that we can supply every chip maker in France. But yeah, they'll use it for alternative products, like chips, cubes, things like that go into lower end wines. But a lot of it is firewood, so it is kind of a waste. But at the same time, the forests are strictly managed and they're very sustainable. There's actually more wood now than there was 600 years ago in the French forests. So it's a very sustainable, they've made it a very sustainable industry. So more trees are being grown than are being harvested every year.
So how many staves or barrels would you get from one tree?
Everybody always asks that question. It all depends on the diameter. There isn't a very clear answer because every log has a different diameter, and so it varies wildly, and it all depends on how much sapwood there is, how much heartwood. So there isn't a clear answer to that. But you get about, typically you'll get about what is the calculation that we use for? I think we get about a cubic meter of wood for every 3 cubic meters harvested, something like that. But it's a very rough figure. As you can see, lots of waste, mountains and mountains of waste of wood. If I could figure out a way to sell firewood, I think I'd make more money than barrels. And unfortunately, you can't import firewood. So this is what a typical raw stave will look like. The interesting thing is that there's about 30% of the weight is moisture. So we air dry all the staves, and after they're made, we bundle them up on a palletize, and we palletize them and we age them outside. And over a 2 to 3 year period of time, and it will gradually lose about half of its moisture content. And we like to use staves that are about 15 to 17% of water. That makes them bendable, not too brittle. Otherwise, if they're too dry, they'll break. If they're too wet, they'll shrink and you'll end up with leaky joints. So the moisture content needs to be between 15 and 17%. So after about 18 months of air drying, we get down to that. And then the rest of the time is just for just bleaching, getting rid of some of the harsher tannins in the wood. Our mill and our stave yard are in the forest area, in the Allier area, which is a department in France, and our cooperage is in Bordeaux. We just prefer the weather in the Allier. It's a little cooler. We get a little bit more rain, a little more variation in temperature, and we just think that aging the staves there is more desirable than in Bordeaux, in the city. It tends to be a little hotter there, not as much rain, and it's just a preference that we have. If that's measurable, I couldn't say, but that's just how our company's decided to do it. Grain is very important in the staves. We sort by grain. So we have what we call tight grain, medium grain, and loose grain. We typically try not to use any loose grain. We like to go with medium and tight grain barrels, and winemakers tend to prefer that. The barrel tends to give up. It plays a very big role in how quickly the tannin is released from the wood into the wine. So one of the things that you get, and this is where Carrie is talking about mouthfeel, and where barrels come in and can help with mouthfeel in wines, and that is the polymerization, the combination of oak tannin and fruit tannin, and you create these longer chains of anthocyanins, and that's what gives you that mouthfeel, that texture, that richness. And we think that tighter and medium to tight grain woods tend to extract more slowly over time, whereas looser grain woods tend to extract quickly and really not as elegant in the tannins that are leached from the wood. So you get a little more harsher. You can get a little harsher, rougher extraction from the tannin in the wood. Some winemakers like looser grain wood for Bordeaux varieties, and some people like them for wines that aren't going to stay in barrels as long, maybe like 12, 13 months, because they do give up their tannin much more quickly. So you get a little quicker evolution. So we do save a little bit of that wood for those customers that like that, but we typically like to stick with medium and tight grain wood.
So those barrels that we were looking at, would you consider those medium or tight, or what grain would those be?
That's pretty tight grain right there. That's pretty tight grain. That's more medium. These are all mixed. What happens is that we end up sorting the wood 4 different times. When the stacks are made, when the stacks are disassembled, when the wood goes to the cooperage, and then in the cooperage when the barrels are made. And so they'll sort wood. Each piece of wood we looked at it at a minimum of 4 times by somebody. So so at this point you've got it's mostly mixed right here, and it has been sorted at least once here. That's incorrect, when they make the stacks. So so you can see the wood is pretty dark. It's been weathered. These have been out there probably for at least 18 months to 24 months. And so you'll see a lot of that dark color, and that's just the sun and the rain interacting with the wood and essentially degrading it and leaching out of the wood. There's the picture of the cooperage. It's in, like I say, it's in Bordeaux. It's a pretty typical cooperage. We actually kind of modernized quite a bit, just to make, because it's such a hard job. It's really a lot of hand labor. And so we're really trying to make it as easy as possible without kind of taking away from the artistry of making the barrel. Barrels are, all the staves are joined, and there's no glue, there's no nails, there's no gaskets. It's all just wood that has been jointed. It's been it's held together with metal hoops or bands, and it's slowly bent over fire. So this right here is the bending fire. So it's a little higher temperature, and you need to get it up to a minimum temperature in order to be able to bend. I mean, as you know, oak's a very hard wood, and so it's difficult to bend. And again, this is where the moisture content plays a big role, because if you don't have the proper moisture content, the wood's too brittle and you end up with a lot of broken and cracked staves, which we still do, and those have to be changed out. But we try to minimize that as much as possible because it really does slow down the process. So you get the wood up to a temperature, you slowly bend the bottom of it. I don't have a good picture of the bending machine. So this is actually on a device that squeezes the bottom and brings the bottom in to give the final shape of the barrel, from that to what you would typically see a barrel would look like. That's heading material. We use tongue and groove in our heads, which has become a more common practice. In the old days, they used actually nails, which wasn't a great idea because nails can rust. And then some people use wooden dowels, but we've gone to tongue and groove, which seems to hold together much better. And with the dowels and the nails, you had to use reed in between each piece of wood, but with the tongue and groove, you don't have to do that anymore. The reed was a problem because sometimes that reed could get moldy. And we found that we had problems with mold on the inside of the barrels, which is not a good idea with wine. So we've gone away from that. That's a sanded head before it's cut into the circle, the round. That's the bending fire. I'm sorry, kind of got out of order here. So that's the machine. There's a clamp on the bottom that slowly squeezes the bottom together over. At this point, the barrel is constantly on heat. So this is a little bit lower fire for the bending. As you can see, that's the machine right there, and the clamps that squeeze the bottom and the fire pot. And then we go on to the toasting fires. And these fires are a little bit different. The pots are a little different, more holes there. This is actually an elevated platform, so there's air getting in underneath into the pot. So we like to toast our barrels at a lower temperature for a longer time. And the barrel that that Carrie is using for the Chardonnay is what we call our Grand Reserve barrel. And that barrel is actually a very, very lightly toasted barrel. The whole idea behind that barrel is to really allow the purity of the fruit to shine through aromatically. We're not trying to add a lot of toasty aromatics to the wine. You can actually go from nice baked bread to burnt characters if you toast too heavily. And the Grand Reserve barrel is on the extreme side of lightness. If you look in that barrel, I'm sure Carrie would tell you this, that it can appear to be almost untoasted. It's almost blonde. And so I think that's why it works well with Chardonnay, because I think with Chardonnay, especially with the kind of wines they're trying to make in terms of a sense of place, you don't want to cover that sense of place up with a bunch of woody, toasty aromatics. So we have developed this barrel. We've been doing this now for about 15, 16 years, the Grand Reserve. And it works with a lot of different varieties, actually. But I think it works particularly well with white wines and in particular with Chardonnay. So, but we have guys that are using it for Pinot Noir, Syrah, and even some cab producers, because that's what they're looking for. Those fruit, the purity of the fruit and the characteristics the fruit give you, especially if you're trying to express a place. It's a great barrel for that. This is a medium plus barrel. You see it's a little bit darker on the inside. There's a light down there, so it kind of enhances the color. But
so Manny, what does it mean? Well, first of all, how long does it take to bend the barrels, and then how?
It takes about 35 minutes to bend a barrel. And here again, there's no clear answer because the ambient temperature and the humidity outside is very important when bending and toasting a barrel. Cooler temperatures take longer. So if it's cold outside, if it's winter, it takes longer. If it's summer, it takes less time. And also, they constantly check the temperature and the humidity, the ambient temperature and humidity in the cooperage, on the outside of the cooperage, and they have to adjust. So that's where the artistry comes in, is these guys, we only have 5 guys that do the toasting out of 85 employees. And those are the only guys that get to stand in front of the fires because of their experience and their expertise, because it's such a nuanced job. And, you know, we've tried to employ, and we do have, I mean, we have, they do have, they do take temperatures of the inside of the fire, their temperature ranges. You want the outside temperature to be within a range, depending upon the toast that you want. And so they are taking infrared measurements as they're making the barrels, but really, they're really doing it a lot on their experience. And so it varies depending upon the temperature and the humidity, which is something to me is just amazing that these guys just, that's what they do. That's what they do every day. They just they rotate through the bending and toasting. And then there are only 5 guys that do that. So
then how long does
it takes about, about 70 to 80 minutes to bend and toast roughly a barrel.
Okay. So then what's the difference in time between like the Grand Reserve versus medium toast versus a heavy toast?
It's more of a function of the fire. The time may not vary that much, but the fire might be, the fire is way lower on the Grand Reserve barrel. So it's just a lower temperature. And it might take about 10 or 15 minutes longer because you have to, especially the bending is the most important part with the Grand Reserve, because you have to do it much more slowly because you're using a much lower temperature. So, and again, it varies because of the ambient temperature and humidity. So we used to think, we used to actually try to write programs for our toast levels, and they never worked. The variability was amazing. We thought we could just do it by time and temperature, but the environment is so dynamic. You know, it's the same like in a cellar, aging wine. There's so many factors. There's humidity, there's temperature, how often you top, how often you open the barrel. You know, it's such a dynamic environment that you just can't come up with a formula or one way of doing it and saying, okay, we're going to do this for a medium toast barrel, this for a Grand Reserve, and this for, because when the environment's different, all those factors change. So it's super complicated. And that's why the toasting is the most important part of the whole process. And so that's why there's a few guys that do that, and that's all they do.
I have to tell you, Manny, that people often ask me, does this Chardonnay, do you use oak in it?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a compliment.
I know. So
I call the Grand Reserve barrel our texture barrel because I think that's really all it does is it just brings a level of mouthfeel and really aromatic wise. I think it's so subtle that I mean, because it's obviously different than a neutral barrel. It should be. You spend all that money, you better have an impact on the wine.
It makes an impact. You can definitely tell when you open the new ones this
Oh yeah.
second year and the third year.
Yeah. So, but but the whole, and actually that's the whole philosophy of the cooperage. We don't want the last thing that you remember about the wine to be wood or oak. We want it to be about fruit. And so we try to make barrels that support that, add some texture, mouthfeel, some nuance, and not a lot of woody characters. And so that's what we're trying to do. And I'm glad people appreciate that. Because, 20 years ago, that was not the case. People wanted barrels that were smack you over the head like a 2x4. I mean, they wanted toast, they wanted wood, they wanted a lot of the coffee roasted characters. That was the fashion 20 years ago. So this is a machine that cuts. So again, I was telling you, there's no glue, there's no gaskets. This cuts what we call the crow's cut in the hair, and that's where the cut that the head goes into in the barrel. That's not a very good picture because I had to take it through glass, but it trims the inside. It gives it that bevel on the inside, and that allows you. And then this is where we drill the bung hole and cauterize it. So the bung hole is cauterized. That's why it's black. And that's the crows right there. The crows and and that's where so there's a little bit of flour that we use to put into that crow's cut for the head to go into. It is gluten-free, by the way. All our barrels are gluten-free.
I never even thought to ask that question.
You'd be surprised we get asked that question. The head is inserted, and then the ring is put on. And this is where we do the pressure check to check for any leaks before the barrel is sent off to be sanded and finished. And you'd be surprised, about 22% of the barrels have to go back for some form of repair, even after all that we do. This is the rate limiting factor in the cooperage right here.
So we have a couple questions here.
Yes.
Adrish wanted to know, do you reuse the metal hoops?
No.
Okay.
What do you mean reuse them? Off of old barrels?
Adrish, do you have any additions to your question? Pop them in the thing. We'll come back to that. Then,
sorry.
oh,
Yeah, I meant, do you take them off of like old barrels and reuse them?
No.
we'd have to send them back to France. So, Paul just wanted to clarify, is cooperage the same thing as barrel maker, or is there a difference?
No, it's same thing.
Okay.
Actually, the term cooperage can apply to anybody that makes a vat or a vessel that holds liquid. So originally, bucket makers were considered coopers when buckets were made out of wood.
Huh.
Yeah.
All right. Kevin asked, do you get any toast from the bending process, or just when you put those larger?
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure you are. You're getting some, but because of the shape, because the barrel hasn't been bent to its shape, you're probably not getting a lot. But certainly, yeah. Anytime you're adding heat to the wood, you're degrading. I mean, you kind of have to define what toast is, and heating wood degrades the wood. And so therefore, anytime you put it over a fire, yes, you're probably getting some form of toasting, but it's minimal at that point. We want it to be minimal at that point.
Okay, so Bill asked what size are the staves?
In terms of width or length?
Width.
They're varying. We don't like to use more than 32 staves per barrel. Width-wise, so the largest stave is obviously, and unfortunately, I don't have the specs memorized, but the largest stave is the bunghole stave, because that is the one you're drilling a hole in it to fill it and empty it. So that has to be the widest part of the barrel, the widest stave in the barrel. And it's also the one that's the most delicate. It's the one that can, usually if you're gonna get a crack, you're gonna get a crack around the bunghole. And also the middle of the barrel is what we call the bilge of the barrel. And that's also the part of the barrel that has the most stress on it. And that's typically, if you're gonna get a crack in the stave, is where you're gonna get the crack, is in the bilge. And again, that goes back to the moisture content in the wood and how quickly or slowly you bend the wood to keep you want to. I mean, you want the wood to be elastic enough to bend, but not so wet, because we've had that problem where the moisture content gets too high. We make the barrel, we ship the barrel. It takes 4 weeks to get over here in a ship. Sits in a port for a week or so, and then it gets to the winery, and the hoops are all loose. It's because the wood was too wet, it dried out, and got loose. So the moisture content of the wood is critical in making it, and then allowing it to keep its shape by the time the winery gets it and fills it. So. Yeah, it's, again, a lot of bad things can happen when you ship barrels.
Speaking of moisture content, Manny, Co brought up soaking the staves.
That's Greenwood Co. And we're not doing that as much as we used to, because we're not leaching as much as we have in the past. We do still do a little bit of soaking. You're referring to the soaking of the wood, Co? See there?
Yeah, way back in the ancient past, you had the 2X soaks and the soaks.
We did that when the wood was green, so that was before aging. So the wood still went into the yard and air dried for a minimum of 2 years. So it even though it may have added some moisture at the beginning, it by the time the wood was aged, it was down to the same. It has to be between 15 and 17%.
Well, in terms of extracting phenolics or woodiness, is that passe now?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Yeah. We only do it on a very limited basis now. And that's what the final barrel looks like.
How come mine don't come with your signature on them?
Oh, it's not my signature. I don't even know whose signature. Oh, that's Pierre. I can have him sign it for you.
We do use 100% boot, Hello.
Yeah, I know. And I had to throw in a picture of a tank just for fun, because I think they're so cool.
They are cool.
That's a fermentation tank.
Mm-hmm.
So. Any other questions? I think that's all I got.
All right, we do have a couple more. The last one, Jim wants to know why is French oak preferred over American? And really, like Manny was saying, they're different. You have different species also with Hungarian and Slovenian.
Yeah.
Those are not Alba either, are they?
That's a good question. I think they are. I think they are Petrea. They're, but again, where they're grown, the soil, the temperature plays a role in the wood, in the flavors you get out of the wood. And even though it may be the same species of oak in Hungary and Romania, it's very different wood. And the American oak is a different species, and it just acts differently with wine because it's denser, and it does. And the other thing that's important, the difference between American and French oak is American oak has less tannin than French oak. So it doesn't, you don't get that polymerization, you don't get as much of that polymerization, and so you don't get as much of that mouthfeel with American oak. So I don't know, you're the winemaker, Carrie. Why do you, have you tried American oak?
You know, I haven't tried it with our fruit, but yeah. I've
tasted it.
I've used American oak in a lot of, when I was in California, I got the chance to do all sorts of things. And we feel that, Dad, I will unmute you, but that's hilarious.
Okay. Before we started making our own wine, we had tasted our wines in a whole variety of different cellars of our customers. And so we tasted our fruit in American oak, we tasted it in French oak, we tasted it in different French oaks. And so when we started our red program, and Co was there at the beginning with Stan, and so Kathy and I said, well, by the way, these are some of the barrels we're going to start with. And Co said, well, that's a winemaker decision. And we said, well, that's fine, but we're going to start with these 5 barrels because we know that it really blends well with our fruit. And so when Co and Stan tasted, they said, okay, they agreed with Kathy, of course. And so that's
always the right answer.
Anyway, we tried them both and love the French as opposed to the American with our fruit.
Yeah, American oak is much jazzier and showier, and it's a very different flavor profile. And because the wines that we're making are very classic and classy and elegant, that's the French barrels are more in that camp, whereas like they'd be more the classical music, and American oak is more jazzy. And that's not that there's anything wrong with that, as we had the discussion a couple weeks ago. There are some bourbon lovers here, which is fine. But if you're not trying to make bourbon, then you're trying to make something different, then that's not the right, it's a stylistic choice.
But a bourbon barrel and an American oak wine barrel are made very, very differently.
Okay, well, we also have a question about the size of bourbon barrels. So do you want to touch on that for half a second? Can you? Do you know much about?
I don't know anything about bourbon. Well, I'm the size of a bourbon barrel versus a wine barrel. Is that your question? Because first of all, the wood that they use for bourbon barrels they're not aged as long. You can make a bourbon barrel in about I think it's about 4 months because it's kiln dried. So they kiln dry the wood. That's how they get rid of the moisture. And
so that was another question. What's the difference between kiln drying and air drying?
Well, a kiln is just it's a device it's a building that extracts. It's a dryer. It extracts it heats the temperature up and extracts moisture out of the wood. So you can get it down to the 15-16% moisture level within, I think, 6 weeks in a kiln versus air drying. And so, because with a bourbon barrel, you're really not looking for a lot of that nuanced flavor, because when they end up toasting the barrel, they char it. It's charred. It's burnt.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they use a blowtorch after they shape it, because those are the. I mean, and bourbon is, you know, that's the flavors they want, and so. So yeah, by the time you cut down an American oak tree, you can probably have a bourbon barrel made within 3 months after it's been cut down.
All right.
Really,
Hey, Aaron, what's your input on this?
I can answer the bourbon barrel question. I've actually been to the Cooperage. They are typically 200 liter. The oak is almost always from Minnesota. That's where they found the best oak for bourbon barrels. It's a tighter grain, and Manny's absolutely spot on correct, where it's a really fast, really hot, really deep char. And that's some of the big differences. The tightness of grain, they're not looking for nearly as much oxygen permeability as you would with wine, and I think that that's a huge difference as well. That's all.
All right. Adrish, do you have anything about bourbon barrels? I know you have some bourbon experience as well. I don't know how that translates to barrels.
Gotta change.
No, I was just agreeing with Manny about the super hot and super high char. Right, it's the inside is just black. It's not toasted. It is straight up black.
I've only been in one cooperage. I've been in World Cooperage where they make a lot of wine, and they also took us over where they made the bourbon barrels, and it was very different. And I think also, if I believe that all bourbon barrels are steam bent as well. They're not bent over a fire. It's much faster.
I was going to point out, in Australia, they use a lot of American oak, particularly for red wines, particularly for Shiraz. A typical taste of Australia Shiraz involves American oak barrels. They Penfolds Grange is 100% American oak. But what they do is they buy the staves, they make the barrels over there, and they age the oak for 4, 5, 6 years before they make the barrel. And that makes a very different impact on the wine than typical American barrel that we see here.
Well, the other thing I want to say about American barrels, even though we don't sell them, is that American oak barrels in the last 15 years have gotten a lot better. They're aging and I agree with Harvey, they're aging the wood longer. They're realizing that you need to age American oak longer than French oak. And they're toasting a little more French, what I would call French style. They're using less steam. I know they were using a lot of steam bent barrels, or steam bending and then toasting. But still, they're different. They're very different. But I think they have gotten a lot better. I remember, 18, 19 years ago, it was American oak barrels were not very good. And they weren't made well. They leaked. They were just, employing bourbon techniques to try to make wine barrels, and they just didn't make very good barrels. So.
Well, Ridge has used American oak exclusively.
Ridge, yeah.
From the beginning.
Yeah.
So it's possible to get good barrels, but you have to be really picky.
Yeah. Well, Silver Oak is 100% American oak, and they actually bought their own cooperage. That's how you
control quality.
Yeah. Vertically integrated there.
So, all right. Do we have any other questions? Oh yeah, Paul brought up the tour of Red Willow. if you guys have not signed up yet, tomorrow night at 5:30, we're starting the Vineyard Toured series around the Yakima Valley, and it starts with John Sauer at Red Willow, and John is amazing. And whenever we do these kind of things, I'm always like, is John coming? Because I want to listen to him. So it'll be really cool. So sign up for the webinar on the link that was in the email, and then you'll get all the details.
If there are any more questions, I got to run, guys. I'm in the middle of a home move, so I have to go sign papers for my old house.
All right. Well, thanks so much,
Yeah, thanks,
Manny. It
Manny.
was
Fun.
great to
Thank
have
you, Manny.
Guys, take care.
Cheers.
Stay safe.
Cheers. We will
Love the show.
Corona free. Bye.
Bye.
I'm glad you guys all enjoyed this. Are there any other wine questions since we lost our barrel answers?
Who knows?
Co?
I'd like to make a comment now that I'd like to have said this when Manny was here, but I think it's really important to look at what he showed us and realize how much history and culture and knowledge that the French cooperage industry brings. It's not, you just can't put a barrel, you can't just throw a barrel together, cut down a tree and make a barrel. This is literally hundreds of years of experience and nuance and making wine in barrels from these areas that we've all developed. And so while you can get barrels from other places and you can make good barrels from American oak if you have great coopers, just the sheer volume and amount of experience and knowledge that the French cooperage industry has is amazing. And the type of flavors and nuance you get from those barrels and those cooperages is phenomenal. So I think there are great American oak barrels, but when you're going for the best, you're still going to French oak, and the coopers who've been making it for decades, if not hundreds of years. So thanks a lot to Manny and to Boutes for taking the time to explain this all to us. I thought it was phenomenal, and I learned a lot even now.
I think that's a great point you brought up, Co. And it also, people always say, is wine artistry or is it science? And it's really hard to say it's both. But it goes, like it says, it starts in so many areas where it's both artistry and science, and bringing that together to make, a really symphonic beverage that you enjoy with friends and with food. And I mean, that's what's exciting about wine, and that's why it's a different beverage than so many others. And
sorry, my 4-year-old neighbor she had to bring me back some chairs that she borrowed yesterday. And she's a riot.
Yeah, it's a right she's not here on the show. She'll be hosting next week. Okay, so where are we at?
All right, I don't know. What did I miss?
Co and I was just talking about the artistry and the science, artistry and science.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad this was fun. So next week, let's see, next week we're going to have Ron from Demtos talk about barrels, because just like winemakers, everybody's got their own opinion, their own take, their own ways they do things. And so this will kind of be fun, because once you see it once, we can, you see it the second time, we can ask Ron different questions. You can ask him the same questions. He may have different answers, but that'll be cool.
So he's another cooperage that we use for our, one of the many that we use for our red wine. We also use some of Manny's Boutes, but we use, how many barrels? We use eight
different coopers for the reds.
Yeah.
Because they all bring different nuances, different flavors, different notes, and so it really adds to the complexity of the red, and that goes into the coat, which we'll be tasting next week. Oh, Natalie wonders, do we sell grapes to other wineries besides Owen Rowe? We sell to about a dozen wineries outside of Owen Rowe. We sell to Betts, DeLeo, Rasa, Vapiano, Pursued by Bear, Valdemar, Kevin White. Who else did we sell to? Fortuity, who was here.
Yeah.
I think Emily left, but I can't forget her anyway. That would be rude.
And there's some
Alexis, who's
new
new.
winemaker.
Wave.
Fortuity.
Wave
So
Alexis.
say
She's
hi.
a new female winemaker to the Yakima Valley. We're very excited. And who else do we have? I don't know. We sold a whole bunch. That's a dad question. Otherwise, I have to like walk my way around the vineyard. But we only keep about a quarter of the fruit for ourselves. So so that is, yeah, we sell to plenty of people, and a lot vineyard designate, but not everybody does. A lot of people will put, a lot of wineries will put our fruit into some of their higher end wines and elevate their blends. So it's part of what makes it interesting on all the different aspects. When, I mean, just like Manny was talking about the nuances and the variability in the cooperages, and then that carries through at every step along the process, and that's what makes it so endlessly fascinating. So, all right, well, I will, I guess unless we have any other questions, we will let you get on with the rest of your evening and hopefully the rest of your Chardonnay. We've got a little bit left, which is nice. I'm sure Mom will help me rectify that situation. But anyway, thanks so much. Have a good evening.
Yeah.
We'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for coming.
Oh.